the one that sticks out to me is the same-sex marriage ruling. For one, you had justices ahead of that ruling who were actually performing same-sex marriages, just throwing to the wind any even semblance of objectivity in that ruling. Would those be a couple of the justices perhaps that would fit the description of individuals that should be impeached from the court for what they did there?
There are some that fit that category. I'd probably put the number closer to 4 or 5. I would look at the Obamacare decision by way of example. When you've got Supreme Court justices who can read the plain letter of the law and then refuse to apply that law as it was applied by lower court judges at the district court level and at the Court of Appeals level now. So we've had a good number of judges who have looked at that same law and said, this is the way it is written. There is no ambiguity there. We're not the ones who are supposed to make law. We're the ones who are supposed to enforce it, and by golly, we're going to enforce it. Well, the Supreme Court got a hold of it and said, well, for a lot of different reasons, this isn't what the law should say, even though it does say that, so we're going to rewrite the law. Well, when they openly rewrite laws, they have gone beyond the powers bestowed upon them by the United States Constitution, and they should be removed from office. So you've got at least 4 or 5 justices that I would vote to remove from office given the opportunity. But here's the problem: we don't have the votes in the House or the Senate to do that. So I'm talking with you right now in a hypothetical sense,
Sure.
because the American people have not given us the votes that are necessary to impeach these justices that openly violate their oaths of office.
Yeah, the John Roberts opinion in the Obamacare case, reading that, just how tortured it was to see him try to explain how, well, they meant for this to be a good thing, and so we need to rule in a way that would help this be a good. I mean, I can't even explain it. It was so bad how tortured it was for him to get to that ruling. It was, oh my gosh. Well, I want to get you to weigh in on something else that's been a hot topic here of late. I want to play a quick audio clip for you by Donald Trump and get your reaction to it. Jeff, do we have that clip ready? All right, let's run the clip, and then we'll get the congressman's response.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
What's your reaction to that?
I don't think there's any question but that there are a lot of illegal aliens coming from Central America, to include Mexico, who have very undesirable characteristics that are putting American citizens at risk. And I'll say something, and this is based on judgment. There's no hard data to back it up. But if you were to look at all the Americans killed by the Islamic State, by the Taliban, during the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, and add them all up, I would wager that we've had more Americans lose their lives at the hands of illegal aliens than in all those conflicts put together.
Wow.
And I know in my congressional district that's true. And we have Redstone Arsenal in my congressional district, which is a fairly large military facility. And notwithstanding the significant military presence in the Tennessee Valley, we've lost more lives, American lives, at the hands of illegal aliens than we've lost in Iraq, Afghanistan combined.
Wow. So it's been interesting to watch the presidential candidates respond to Trump's remarks there, and so many of them are saying, I can't believe he say that. I'm not going to defend him saying that. And he's
he was a little bit overbroad. There are a lot of good people in Mexico, and there are a lot of good people who are illegal aliens. But notwithstanding that they are good people, there is an economic issue here that you have to pay attention to. And it really comes down to this. Who are you elected to represent, American citizens or illegal aliens? If you're here in Washington to represent American citizens, then you have to take into account job losses and wages oppressed at the hands of illegal aliens, regardless of whether those illegal aliens are good people or bad people. Either way, they are taking jobs from American citizens, and because of the huge surge in illegal alien labor, they have distorted the labor market such that employers are now in a position where they can pay American citizens and families less rather than more for the work that's done by American citizens. And so, again, that's just pure labor supply economics. And it does not make any difference if the illegal alien is basically a good person or a bad person. The bottom line is they are hurting Americans by their mere presence in the United States of America because of the lost jobs and the wages suppression occasioned by this huge surge in the supply of labor.
Now, speaking of wage suppression, I'm glad you brought this up. I actually wasn't planning on talking about this, but I forget sometimes, Congressman, that you have an economics degree, and you really are the ideal person to talk to about some of this stuff. It made me think of the Trade Promotion Authority and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the accompanying free trade agreements that the Obama administration has now been giving wide latitude to negotiate on behalf of the American people without frankly, not much oversight from Congress in a lot of ways. Do you feel like that those deals that I think a lot of Alabamians were really frustrated with how that played out, do you feel like that those deals are going to have a negative impact on jobs here in Alabama?
Too early to tell because we do not know what are in the trade agreements. Those are still under negotiation. They're still in a draft stage. And you don't know what the final product is going to be. And so I don't want to prejudge something that is not in final form. When it gets into final form and it's submitted to the United States Congress, then I can start formulating a judgment. Having said that, though, if you look at past trade agreements like NAFTA, CAFTA, the agreements with Korea, any number of countries over the last quarter of a century or so, here's the hard data. If you look at the trade surplus or deficit with these 20 or so nations that we've entered into trade agreements with over the last quarter century, and you look at the trade surplus or deficit as of the date that the trade agreement was entered into, and then you look at it today, America's trade deficit is $143 billion worse than it was at the time that the trade agreements were entered into, which suggests very strongly that we've had weak negotiators in the White House and we've had weak leadership in the House and the Senate that has ratified these trade agreements based on a song and dance as to how good they are for America. So if that track record is any indication, then the trade agreements that we're looking at will ultimately cost American jobs, and that's evidenced by another bill that was passed in the House and the Senate relating to subsidizing American workers who lose their jobs because of these trade agreements. Now, if they're such a good deal for America, right. Why are we going to spend billions of dollars paying people who have lost their jobs because of the trade agreements that were supposed to help us?
It doesn't make any sense. This deal's going to be great, but we'll also set aside some money for all you people that are going to lose your job. So, it just makes no sense.
Now, if I could add one final comment about Trade Promotion Authority, which is the so-called fast track, which is greasing the skids. In my judgment, it was bad because it was unconstitutional. The United States Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, quite clearly states that it requires a two-thirds vote of the United States Senate to approve treaties. And if you look at the Federalist Papers, which were documents drafted by the people who wrote the Constitution, and those documents were used to convince the American people and the 13 states to ratify the Constitution. The Federalist Papers say that treaties include matters of commerce. So if you're entering into a trade agreement under Article 2, Section 2, it is captured as a treaty, and it requires a two-thirds vote of the United States Senate, which is a high bar, meaning we've got to be pretty well convinced that this is in the best interest of America. A low bar is what the TPA does. It lowers it from that two-thirds requirement to a 51% in the House, 51% in the Senate under Article 1, Section 8 of the Commerce Clause. Well, I think those two things need to be read together. Yes, in the House it ought to be a majority vote, but in the Senate it ought to be a two-thirds vote, not a majority vote. And so I believe that the Trade Promotion Authority that the House and Senate passed and the President signed is unconstitutional because it reduces that two-thirds to a majority vote. And why is this important? It is very important because anytime you enter into trade agreements, you are ceding American sovereignty, control over us, to other foreign entities. That's what these agreements are all about. By way of example, because of a treaty that we entered into and the way the World Trade Organization interpreted these treaties and agreements. Over the past few years, we've been paying Brazilian cotton farmers hundreds of millions of American tax dollars to grow cotton to compete against Americans. Hundreds of millions being spent, American tax dollars sent to Brazil. Another example would be food labeling. Well, just the very same week that the TPA is under discussion in the House and the Senate, the House passed legislation to repeal the requirement that foreign food products have country of origin labeling on them, and we did so because of a trade agreement, and we were ordered to do so by a foreign entity. And so that's the kind of ceding of sovereign power that the framers of the Constitution were concerned about, so concerned that they required a two-thirds vote of the Senate before we would enter into those kind of trade treaties. And that's the problem with the TPA. It's contrary to sound public policy, and it violates the Constitution.
Talking to Congressman Mo Brooks from Alabama's 5th Congressional District. Congressman, I know you got to go, but I got one more question for you before you do. I wanted to get your take on maybe just the general lay of the land right now in the presidential race. We got 14 confirmed official Republican candidates right now, probably going to balloon up to 16 here in the next week or so. I know you've had some real positive things to say about Senator Ted Cruz. I just wanted to get your take on the just general lay of the land right now in the presidential race.
Well, here's the general lay of the land. I was at a Hartselle Rotary Club meeting last week, and I was their speaker, and I was at a table where there were about 7 or 8 people, and I polled them. Not a single person there agreed on the same candidate.
Wow.
So, I mean, people right now, American people all over the map. I'll tell you what my preference is. I want someone who is smart, somebody who can hold their own in a debate with the Democrat nominee, and someone who's got the backbone to do what is right for America, regardless of the pressure to do the wrong thing. And there's tremendous pressure in Washington, D.C. to do the wrong thing for America, particularly financial pressure from special interest groups that pay you to do the wrong thing. And in looking at the 14 candidates, the 2 that I see that have been in the heat of the kitchen and have stood strong, who are smart, who can hold their own in a debate, Governor Scott Walker out of Wisconsin, Senator Ted Cruz out of Texas. Some of the other candidates may also fit in that category, and I just don't know them well enough. I haven't seen them perform in a public position before, and I think that's important because that way you know to some degree whether they're telling you what they think you want to hear or whether they're telling you what they really believe and they'll stick to it.
That's right.
And so I like people who are tested and have served in public office. Then we've got a number of liberals that I hope will not be our nominee. They'll be more moderate than the Democrat nominee, but presidential moderation, where we do the wrong thing, really hurts our country as much as or more than a Democrat president candidate doing the wrong thing. And I would put in that category Jeb Bush out of Florida, Chris Christie out of New Jersey, maybe Marco Rubio out of Florida. There are 14 candidates right now qualified, and I could go down the list on each and every one of them. I've met most of them. But I think we need someone who understands the constitutional principles that have made America the greatest nation in world history, and we've held that position for 7 decades. And will stick to those foundational principles come hell or high water, and will lead us as we should be led, as we need to be led, and as the world needs us to lead.
Well, Congressman, we appreciate you taking the time to, I like the fact that you're willing to name names. I always appreciate that. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Hope you come back again soon.
Certainly. Take care.
Bye-bye. It's Congressman Mo Brooks. Take a quick break. We'll come back and wrap this thing up. Cliff Sims, Yellowhammer Radio.
This is Yellowhammer Radio.